Hello, and here we are for the answers for the 70s music quiz. Okay, let's get going right away with the first question, the first trivia question. The act to achieve the most number ones of the decade, 7 number ones, was, of course, it was ABBA. Pop sensations, really, of the decade, weren't they? Those 7 number ones were Waterloo, Mamma Mia, Fernando, Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Name of the Game, and Take a Chance on Me. And I think it was from Mamma Mia through to Take a Chance on Me was all consecutive. They had 2 more in the 80s. They had Winner Takes It All and Super Trooper, if I remember correctly. But between Take a Chance on Me and Winner Takes It All, there were a number of singles that didn't make it to number 1, but you know, they dominated, particularly that latter half of the 70s. So there we are. There's ABBA for you. But the biggest selling album of the decade in the UK might be surprising. Okay, maybe it's not, but it was to me. Right from the beginning of the decade, Bridge Over Troubled Water. That's a wonderful, wonderful album. One of my favourites of the entire decade. There's no doubt about it. But surprised that it was the biggest selling album of the 70s in the 70s. So there we are. 33 weeks it's spent at number 1 in the album charts. Great way to go out, really, for them. But which album from the 70s has now sold the most in the UK up to the present day? Well, it won't surprise you that it's Dark Side of the Moon. And the figures are quite spectacular, really. 14 times platinum. An estimated 45 million copies sold. 952 weeks spent in the US album charts. Whew. There we go, Dark Side of the Moon. But it doesn't match up with The Wizard of Oz. The 4 biggest selling singles of all time. Well, looking at that again, that's a slight misnomer there. I'm not. It's not quite the 4 biggest selling singles of all time, is it? Because the 2 biggest selling singles of all time were not from the 70s. They were the remake of Candle in the Wind for Diana and Band Aid. But after that, the next 3 of the next 4 were released in the 70s. In fact, actually, the next 3 were released in the 70s. Now, which ones were they? Of course, they were Mull of Kintyre, Bohemian Rhapsody, and You're the One That I Want. Rivers of Babylon, very high selling, up in the top 20, top 13th, I think, on the list, something like that. But it doesn't make the quite the levels of the rest. I mean, Boney M had massive selling singles. But yeah, you would be surprised if it was up the top level there. Bohemian Rhapsody, of course, built because it had the several times of sales. The 75 time when it was number 1 for 9 weeks, was it, I think? Or was it only 6 that time and 9 later? Whichever way round it was. And then, of course, at the beginning of the 90s, when Freddie Mercury died, it again went there to Christmas number 1 both times. And that's why it sold so many. Okay, there's some albums to take along the way. The Grease soundtrack, of course, Night at the Opera, which housed Bohemian Rhapsody originally. And Mull of Kintyre, well, obviously it's not on Band on the Run. It's from about 4 years later. But that's the album to listen to, let's be fair. If you're going to listen to one Wings album, that's the one to go for. Band on the Run, terrific album. Okay, now the 2 biggest selling movie soundtracks of the 70s, of course, were Saturday Night Fever and the aforementioned Grease. So the link is John Travolta, even though he never sang, of course, on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack at all. He was just a star. Okay, onto our prog rock section. Now, it may well be that many of you recognise this and knew it was King Crimson, and then sit there and think to yourself, yeah, but what's the name of the album, or which album was it? Well, I suppose the clue is looking at the cover and seeing that obviously we are dealing with gods here, although surprised that there's not more sea apparently there, because of course it is in the wake of Poseidon. by King Crimson, which their second album, of course, even though nowhere near as critically acclaimed as In the Court of King Crimson, it was actually a higher charter. It got a place higher in the album charts than the first album did. This album, right, well, that's Annie Hall on the left, a mountain being climbed in the middle, and George Foreman showing off his lean, mean grilling machines, his grills. This is Hawkwind's masterpiece, Hall of the Mountain Grill. Okay, another prog rock legendary album there. A title that comes from a combination of the famous Edvard Grieg piece, in the Hall of the Mountain King, combined with apparently a Portobello Road cafe that Hawkwind used to frequent called the Mountain Grill. So there you go. They put that together and got it. The Hall of the Mountain Grill. They took off the in there. The lyrics. Well, talking about unicorns speaking to their true love's eyes. Well, it can only be one person, can't it? Really, it's Peter Gabriel and his incredibly strange Genesis lyrics. Although actually, I'm not sure these were his lyrics. They might well have been Rutherford's or Banks's. But can you tell me where my country lies? Is what it is there. This, of course, was the penultimate Gabriel album, and notable, selling England by the pound. Notable for Phil Collins' first appearance singing lead vocals. Yeah, there you go. Who knew what was coming? Goodness me, that rain's coming down outside, isn't it? Well, it is nearly Christmas, I suppose. Okay, Tubular Bells. You've got to love Tubular Bells, haven't you? Who was the master of ceremonies? You remember the one who says, "No, two distorted guitars," that kind of stuff? Yeah, him. That was Vivian Stanshall, of course, the member of the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, who so memorably contributed to the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. I went, some of you may have heard of this, to see last year the Tubular Bells for Two tour, where this Aussie guy and another musician sit there and play nearly all of the instruments from Tubular Bells, nearly all the original instruments between the two of them live in concert. It's really quite impressive, quite amazing to watch. Oldfield himself, of course, played 20 instruments on it. This also famously, of course, was the album that made Virgin Records. It turned them into a real player, which, of course, the Sex Pistols benefited from in the end. Not much connection, really, is there? Tubular Bells and the Sex Pistols? Well, maybe there is. Some musicologists will find it for me. Dark Side of the Moon we're back to. One of the great, most famous albums of not just the 70s, but of all time, really. So which one of these isn't true? Well, let's take some that are. It was originally called Eclipse, okay, and was only changed after they found a similar album. Oh, well, an album called Eclipse. I don't think it was similar to this. It was partially responsible for Monty Python and Holy Grail financially, because the money that Dark Side of the Moon made, Pink Floyd invested in the movie Monty Python and Holy Grail, so they helped get it made. That's a connection to make, certainly if you're not a Floyd fan, but you're a Python fan. Yeah, you are. There's a reason to love Dark Side of the Moon. Paul McCartney was originally on the album. Apparently, it was part of these recordings which crop up every now and again of somebody speaking, which were responses to questions that they were being asked on a questionnaire, kind of broader things. And Macca, being very much himself, really, they felt, shall we say, he didn't answer them genuinely. He was being a bit of a showman, giving the answers that made him look good or would show off things, and that wasn't what they were looking for at all. So yes, they cut his contribution. He was recorded because he was in that Abbey Road studio at the time, but he was recording Red Rose Speedway, if I remember correctly. So the only one there that is not true is about Money being the only song in 7/4 time to make the UK top 40. It's certainly not true that it was the only song. There have been a number of other songs in 7/4 time to make the top 40 in the UK. Amongst them, wonderfully, of course, 2 + 2 is 5 equals 5 from Radiohead. Alice in Chains, Them Bones as well. I think Devo did a song in 7/4 as well, or I don't think it made the top 40. Okay, disco. The kings of disco, Chic, of course, and Risque. The second album, I believe, by them. This album, this is a bit cheeky, really, so apologies for this. Okay, on the left, it's a man and two women, so he's loving two, love two. In the middle is the famous scene from Four Weddings and a Funeral, where Hugh Grant declares his love through the medium of the Partridge Family. Gets around to saying, I love you. So love to, love you, and then the baby. Yeah, Donna Summer. Donna Summer's classic Love to Love You Baby album. The song Love to Love You Baby was originally released as just a 3-minute single, 3-minute 15, something like that, and tanked. It was only when the disco version, when Moroder's disco version, 17 minutes long, I think it was, which in the end turned out to be the first side of the album Love to Love You Baby on its own, when that became really popular in the disco world, that the whole thing took off. There you go. We're Lost in Music. It's Sister Sledge, of course. They feel so alive. They quit their 9 to 5 because they're lost in music. Absolutely. Sister Sledge, genuine sisters, of course, have unfortunately lost one of their members to drugs over the years, but despite being a very strongly Christian family as well, that's an album packed with classics, isn't it? We Are Family, Lost in Music. Apparently Luther Vandross sang backing on Lost in Music. Now, the original version of the chant Freak Out. This is a story that many of you may well know. But I love it. So that's why I'm always going for it. Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards apparently were going to Studio 54 in New York and were denied entry by one of the bouncers out the front. Whether it was to do with skin colour, I don't know, but I think that's the suggestion. Anyway, they went home in a fury and started jammed this song, in which they shouted, "Oh, F off," to get their frustration out, and that turned into Freak Out. So next time you hear it, next time you hear the Freak, think about it. Think about them angry, sat there in their New York apartment shouting F off. And it goes well there. There's Say Chic. We've already seen Risque, but Say Chic is it's just hit after hit after hit. Terrific album. And some of the album tracks are terrific on that as well. Well worth a listen. Okay, we're back to the facts. This time Saturday Night Fever. Okay, now the Bee Gees were not involved in the film until post-production. The film had been totally finished and put together and recorded and everything before they were ever contacted and provided the soundtrack, which is very strange, isn't it? I find that a very difficult one to believe, because you think to yourself how the dancing fits, but evidently not. Jive talking, which is one of the reasons they were approached in the first place, that jive talking was the kind of stuff they were looking for. There was a sequence involving it, and it was cut from the film. I gather it was to do with Tony getting ready, I think, something along those lines anyway. And Disco Inferno was inspired by the film The Towering Inferno, which again, another fact that just I find beyond belief, because I just can't imagine the Tramps sat there in front of the TV watching The Towering Inferno and thinking, hey, that's an idea for a tune. Hey, Burn Baby Burn. It's a disco inferno while watching people burn to their deaths on a disaster film. but it's not the biggest selling soundtrack of all time. It was for many, many years, but The Bodyguard has overtaken that quite considerably. I'd much rather listen to Saturday Night Fever myself, personally. Of course, if you're listening to 70s albums this week, then Saturday Night Fever is a must, really, isn't it? Okay, from disco to glam. There's connections, aren't there? Mott by Mott the Hoople, of course, was this album. The group who, in the well-known story, of course, were breaking up quite happily. And along comes David Bowie and tells them not to. And so, jokingly, Ian says to him, all right then, give us a song, a hit song, and we won't. And he did, of course, with all the young dudes. Mott by Mott the Hoople. This one, I did a similar one to this in a quiz a few weeks ago, but I don't know. I like doing it, so I'll do it again. This was Diamond Dogs. Also, it gets me to bring in the god of the 70s, the ultimate man. I'm not a fan of Diamond Dogs, I have to say. I really think it's one of his weaker albums. I would say one of his weakest, but then he did pin-ups after that, didn't he? But, you know, the 70s is packed, of course. And if you don't want to listen to Diamond Dogs, why not give Hunky Dory a go? What an album. What an absolute classic. Or give Ziggy Stardust a go. Having said that, I doubt there's anybody out there who hasn't listened to it so far. But, you know, one of the greats of the 70s, no doubt. One of the favourites to get up there. Aladdin Sane. Not quite Ziggy's level, but there's some classic songs on that. I love that piano part. The Mike Garfield. His name's gone from my mind. The piano part in particular. Low, which is a contender for, well, it's going to be my number one album of the 70s, I have to say. I don't think anything can come close to it for what it does, or even its follow-up Heroes. And I haven't even mentioned Lodger, which some people would say I shouldn't do, but you know, there it is. And of course, The Man Who Sold the World sneaks into the 70s, I believe, at the beginning as well. So give yourself a Bowie fest. Okay, well, of course, this is the wonderful eloquence of Mark Bolan, originally one of Bowie's great rivals, of course. The two of them had a bit of a competition thing going on. Of course, Bolan went stratospheric first, but didn't have the staying power that Bowie did, or the talent, I'm afraid. But there you go. It's easy to mock. Well, you're built like a car. You've got a hubcap, diamond star, halo. Yeah, he wrote a lot of lyrics that made virtually no sense. But to be fair, I love David Bowie, and he did write Here Comes the Goon Squad, or We Are the Goon Squad and We're Coming to Town, beep, beep, didn't he? So, you know, they're not all great. This is a great one. Bernard Jury, Shane Fenton. It's Alvin Stardust, and there's just in case you wish, apparently the best Alvin Stardust album, so I am told. I'm not going to listen to it myself. But yes, originally born Bernard Jury, he joined a group with the lead singer, Shane Fenton. Unfortunately, Shane Fenton died, and they were due to go on stage or go on a tour, and they didn't know what to do. So essentially, I was only 17, the real Shane Fenton, when he died, of rheumatic fever, apparently. They needed Shane Fenton because they were called Shane Fenton and the Fentones. This was actually back in the early 60s. And they were invited by the BBC to appear on a programme. And so, to make sure they were all right, Bernard changed his name to Shane Fenton. And then after a while, to Alvin Stardust, which obviously is a bit more glam. Okay, the Chapman Chin partnership. Mike Chapman, Australia, make a huge amount of money in the glam period. Which ones of these did he write? Well, yes, he wrote Blockbuster. Yes, he wrote Tiger Feet. Yes, he wrote Can the Can, but See My Baby Jive was all wrong. Okay, Wizard Only. So He wrote all the Sweet stuff. He wrote most of Mud's stuff, I believe, and I think he wrote all of the early Suzi Quatro stuff. I think he might have written all of Suzi Quattro's hits. All three of those are number ones, weren't they, I think, as well. Blockbuster also came out same time as, we're back to Bowie again, aren't we, as Gene Genie, with the exact same riff, both ripped off from, I think knowingly ripped off as well, but from Muddy Waters, but came out at the same time and ended up pushing to the top of the charts. There's always been accusations over who copied who and whatever, but it does seem it might actually be a coincidence. And of course, Blockbuster got the number one, and Gene Genie was kept to number two. On a punk, this of course is Stiff Little Fingers in Flamboyant Material. Stiff Little Fingers are a Northern Irish punk band writing about the troubles there. Very insightful lyrics going on there. This of course is Rocket, Two Turtle Doves, and the Russian football team, Rocket to Russia, the Ramones. You may prefer their debut, you may not like them at all, but certainly there's no denying their impact, is there? You Better Paint Your Face. This, of course, is The Clash. Monumental stuff off their first album. No Elvis, Beatles, or the Rolling Stones in '77. Well, there's a manifesto that kind of outstrips anything the Pistols were saying, doesn't it, really? And there's their album there. Of course, the Beatles had they had another go at the Beatles, didn't they, in London Calling later on, a better album for my mind as well. But yeah, phony Beatlemania's bitten the dust. Now the Damned, I love the Damned. It's not necessarily just necessarily music, it's all right. I quite like it. Something about the Damned as a group I quite like. Their second album, Music for Pleasure. Maybe it's because they've got someone called Rat Scabies in the band. Maybe that's why. Anyway, their second album, Music for Pleasure. Who did they want to produce it? You couldn't get less punk than the founder of Floyd himself, Syd Barrett. Yeah, I mean, he turned him down. He wasn't in a good state, of course, as well. But there you are. But few albums there to throw at you. Of course, Syd Barrett right at the beginning of the 70s, and the Madcap Laughs. What a strange album that is, but quite compelling, really. I really like it. And my favourite Damned album there, Machine Gun Etiquette. Okay, and finally, the Pistols gig at Manchester Free Trade Hall on the 4th of June 1976. You may well remember, as I said in the main quiz, the scene in 24 Hour Party People, where Tony Wilson is taking us on a tour around the room of all the people who are in the room who went on to form these the backbone of the Manchester scene for so long. Apparently, there are over 7,000 documented cases of people claiming they were at this gig, yet there were only about 40 people there. Just shows you, doesn't it? And many musicians claim to be there as well, and were claimed to be there. It's partially because there was a second gig a month or two later at the Free Trade Hall when the Pistols came back, and it was much broader attendance there. But at that original gig, yes, Pete Shelley was there. Pete Shelley from the Buzzcocks with Howard DeVoto. They were the reason they were the reason the Pistols were there. They'd gone down to London off their own back and persuaded the Pistols to come up and play in Manchester, apparently largely because they wanted to support them with their new group, the Buzzcocks. But then the Buzzcocks weren't ready to support them when they did come up, and a fairly anonymous band supported in the end. They did support the second gig, apparently, but they were definitely there. We know Peter Hook was there, absolutely true, along with Bernard Sumner. Peter Hook then went out the very next day and bought a bass guitar. And so you can directly link the gig to the formation of Joy Division. Morrissey most definitely was there. It does sound like the kind of thing that Morrissey would say he did when he didn't, but he was most definitely there. The suggestion is that he didn't enjoy it hugely. He just felt that he was probably a bit better than who he'd seen there. The one who wasn't there was Tony Wilson. He was at the second gig. So that whole scene in 24 Hour Party People, well, no wonder he gets wrong who was there. He wasn't there himself. But it kind of fits the pattern of the film, doesn't it? You know, You can't completely believe what Tony Wilson's saying all the time. There were other ones there as well, other people there. Marky Smith was definitely there when I formed the Fall afterwards. Again, probably because he thought, well, I could do that, or at least my kind of music can succeed at this game. And Paul Morley, the musical journalist, who was the one who wrote it up at the same time. There you are. A couple of little suggestions there. Joy Division for you. Unknown Pleasures in '79, cracking album there. And although many prefer the Buzzcocks debut, other music in a different kitchen is my preference, I would say, of the two. Okay, over to pop. Different world in the '70s pop, wasn't it? Venus and Mars. Yes, you might say it's not a pop album, this Wings album here, but it is, let's be honest. Wings were a pop band. You know, McCartney was always the pop star, not the rock star, wasn't he? You know, Lennon was the rock star, McCartney was the pop star. Here, right, so we have Jesus, and we have the Fonz, and the Fonz is cool, of course. So the Jesus of Cool. Nick Lowe's Jesus of Cool, a wonderful, wonderful album that I strongly suggest anybody to go out and listen to. An absolutely terrific collection of songs. Nick Lowe's debut. Nick Lowe, one of the real underestimated, undervalued talents of our time. It wouldn't surprise you to know that they couldn't call it Jesus of Cool in America, of course. So it got the rather bland title, Pure Pop for New People, instead. Matchtalk Men and Matchtalk Cats and Dogs was a real one-hit wonder, wasn't it? Probably a good thing too. The song about Lowry. He painted Matchtalk Men and Matchtalk Cats and Dogs. He painted kids on a corner of the street that was sparking clogs. Or, as I referred to before, the Barron Knights' Taste of Aggro, the first single I ever owned, in which they produced a medley of satirical versions of the songs, including, if my memory serves me correctly, Boney M and The Rivers of Babylon, which turned into There's a Dentist in Birmingham, and The Smurfs, which they turned into a song about people escaping from prison. This one turned into the story of a rogue painter who just went round painting people, not in the way that Lowry did, but literally walking up to them with paint and painting them. And I think it turned into he painted Grandad's bike and next door's cats and dogs. He painted he painted a couple on the corner of the street that were having a snog. There you go. Whatever happened to them? The TV cop who had 2 number 1 hits in '77, of course, was Hutch, David Soul. I remember watching him on Pebble Mill at 1. I mentioned the other TV cop. Kudos to you if you managed to, if you knew about that one as well. That was also a number 1. Teddy Savalas, Kojak, had a number 1 with one of the most bizarre number 1s I've ever come across. If a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? Now, it's not a great song anyway. It's in a very, very syrupy version. And he speaks. He just talks the whole way through. He just says the words. Not even in that kind of spoken, half spoken, half song way that you get in some Disney musicals. He just literally speaks in his gravelly voice. And if that's not weird enough, try and look at the video at some point. There he is, sat there in a chair, his bald head there in front of him, and just a bunch of women around him just stroking him. It's a very strange video indeed. Teeny boppers from the '70s. Okay, right, so what have we got? David Cassidy got to number 1 with How Can I Be Sure? And with Daydreamer, backed with the wonderfully sounding Puppy Song. I have to say, I've never heard either. We have the Osmonds next, who got to number 1 with Love Me for a Reason. We have the Bay City Rollers, who got to number 1 with Bye Bye Baby, followed immediately by Give a Little Love. They were successive releases that got to number 1. And David Essex got to number 1 with Gonna Make You a Star, but also with Rock On. So yes, it was the Osmonds. Only one number 1. A bit unlucky, you might say. They probably produced the best song of all those ones we've mentioned there. If you include Wild Horses, going back to a previous another question, that's come up in a minute. Crazy Horses, an absolute bonkers song, but you know, very good there. David Essex, you know, in America, he's treated as a one-hit wonder for rock on. I would tell you my David Essex West Ham story, but I think I told that one before on a recent music quiz. So I think if you go back to was it 74 one, I think it was. Yeah, you can have my David Essex story there. Okay, hard rock and metal. This, of course, is Black Sabbath's Paranoid. I'd love to tell you the story about how Black Sabbath became Black Sabbath, but I have read 3 different accounts of the story, all 3 of them completely different. So who knows? And there's plenty of Black Sabbath stories. We could be sat here all night talking about Black Sabbath. Tony Iommi and his loose, supposed to getting the sound, the loose sound, heavy sound of it, because he tunes his guitar very loosely to help with the pain of playing, because his fingers were cut off in an industrial accident. Very, very black country. The tips of his fingers anyway, which he also wears plastic ends for to help. Anyway, number 32, this of course is Highway to Hell, AC/DC. Apparently the name that they referred to their tour bus as. There you go. And as we wind on down the road, our shadows torn our soul. This of course is Stairway to Heaven from Led Zepp 4. There walks a lady we all know, shines white light and wants to show how everything still turns to gold. And if you listen very hard, the tune will come to you at last, when all are one and one is all, to be a rock and not to roll. No matter what anyone tries to tell me, it's gibberish, isn't it? It doesn't mean anything. Anyway, Led Zepp 4, what an album. I'd say Led Zepp 3 is even better. And look at that collection along there of albums. 5 absolutely superb albums on there. And in Through the Outdoor. So plenty to deal with there for what I would consider the band of the 70s, most definitely. Now, this fact, I love this. The classic rock track that is a true story about how a Swiss casino burnt down during a Frank Zappa and Mother's Invention concert. I talked about the Frank Zappa bit, but I must have been tired when I wrote this. Mothers of Intervention. Goodness me. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention concert. It's been a long term, hasn't it? Anyway, the band watched from their hotel room while this casino burnt down, and what did it make them think about? It made them think, obviously, it was Deep Purple and Smoke on the Water. How strange. Machine Head, what a good album though. Which of these UK rock groups did not top the US album charts in the 70s? It may well surprise you that it is The Who, and to make up for it there, I've given you a recommendation of who's next. Zeppelin did with 3 or 4 albums, I believe, in there in the 70s. Definitely 3 and 4, and I think Physical Graffiti as well. Bad Company topped with their self-titled album. Jethro Tull were number 1 with Thick as a Brick. And then a year later with a Passion Play. So they had a bit of an American adventure themselves there. Country rock. As I said, I don't care if you don't call this country rock. I do. It's got country influences on there, and it's got rock. Anyway, Sticky Fingers, the first Stones release on their own album, on their own label. Hence why they could be a little bit more outrageous and get away with it, as they are on that cover there, which, deliberately provoking obscenity. And their lyrics became more profane as well at the same time. So this, you probably won't like it, but it's Pieces of the Sky, you see. They're all pieces of the sky. Emmylou Harris's very, very lovely country album. Not her debut, many people think it is. The first one was such a flop that no one ever remembers it. I want to live, I want to give. I've been a miner for a heart of gold, says Neil Young. Probably the peak of his 70s powers here. Certainly the peak of his country rock powers before he went off into very different directions for the rest of the decade. What an album Harvest is. Absolutely terrific. Dylan was a big Neil Young fan. still is, I suppose, but didn't like this song, Heart of Gold. Apparently, his quote was, "If it sounds like me, it should be me." Very Dylan. Okay. Don Henley and Glenn Frey backed Linda Ronstadt on her 71 tour very, very soon before they formed the Eagles. I mean, they must have got the idea there because they formed in 71 as well. So she gave the world the Eagles, which some people would be very upset about. I think it's a bit of snobbery sometimes. The Eagles wrote some cracking songs, and Hotel California is a great album. I'm not a big fan of the song Hotel California, to be honest, but it's a good album. The 70s Dylan album that connects George Harrison, Elvis Presley, and David Crosby. Well, it's not Planet Waves, it's not Desire, it's not Self-Portrait. It is New Morning, his 1970 album there. How, well, If Not For You was also recorded by George Harrison, and they did do a duet on it as well, although not on the one obviously on the album there. Went to See the Gypsy was a song about I think a fictionalized meeting with Elvis, and typically with Dylan we don't know whether that's the case or not, because he does love to self-mythologize, shall we say, along those lines. And David Crosby was the inspiration apparently for Day of the Locusts. Well, he wasn't. An experience where David Crosby was present at the time as well. So there we go. All a part of those Dylan albums. Of course, the best Dylan album of the 70s isn't on there. Blood on the Tracks, one of the classics for us there. I thought I put Self-Portrait in instead. Not one of the classics. New Wave. Elvis produced a few good albums in the 70s, didn't he? Armed Forces was the last, and the last before he went off on his soul journey. The album that we're looking for here, of course, is Parallel Lines. That's what they are. They're not perpendicular lines. Parallel Lines by Blondie. Debbie Harry famously claimed that she was abducted by Ted Bundy and managed to escape from his car. It's since been proved that pretty much that didn't happen, as Ted Bundy was nowhere near anywhere Debbie Harry was at the time she was talking about. But interesting. Wonder why she tells the story. Did it happen and she just thinks it was Ted Bundy and it was someone else? Does she like attention? Who knows? Parallel Lines, though, is a very good album. Giant steps are what you take walking on the moon. I hope my legs don't break walking on the moon. Sometimes Sting's lyrics were really, really bad, weren't they? Now, Walking on the Moon is supposedly not about walking on the moon. It's about feelings of love and how it makes you feel like you're walking on the moon. You're so light there. And I assume that's why I hope my legs don't break must mean I hope I don't stop feeling this way. But really, what a rubbish line. Awful. It's nearly as bad as the few years later, just like the old man in the book by Nabokov. Dreadful. If for no other reason, he's pronounced, it's not Nabokov, it's Nabokov. Anyway, right. Wait, enough picking on Sting. Everyone does it. Probably with good reason. Regatta de Blanc. That's the album, which is a kind of a bastardized version of White Reggae, which they probably should have called it Less Pretentious, but then they wouldn't be the police if it was less pretentious, would they? Okay, 44. Which new wave saint tore up the picture of John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John? It was Bob Geldof when they got to number one for Rat Trap. Yeah, they had 2 number ones, the Boomtown Rats. I mean, everyone will remember I Don't Like Mondays, and what a great song it was too. But Rat Trap got to number one, really? It did. Never mind. And finally on our new wave adventure here, the new wave group who named themselves after a Velvet Underground album, and then got what they thought was the incredible fortune to be produced by John Cale, only for it to go wrong was, of course, Squeeze. This was for their debut album, when they turned up with everything ready, expecting John Cale to be a producer and just listen to the songs and produce them. He listened to songs, basically told them to go away and write some new ones. Threw all the songs out, go and write some new ones. First album they did. And apparently some very strange things here. At one point he said to them, Glenn Tilbrook, I think it actually says, he said to them, your lyrics are quite soft. Why don't you go away and write some songs about muscle men? What a strange thing to say. That is apparently why that front cover is of a muscle man. But there we are. I haven't put that one up there because it's not very, well, it is good, but it's not that great. After What Happened, Call for Cats is a much better album. Okay, on to our connections. So, John Cale's Fear, Are We Not Men, My Devo, songs about buildings and food, and music from the Penguin Cafe were all produced or executive produced by Brian Eno. He produced both the Talking Heads and the Devo album. He's executive producer on the other two there, starting his production kingdom there. A real figure of the 70s, wasn't he? Roxy Music at the beginning. That string of always very interesting solo albums, but moving from kind of rock solo albums through to a kind of slightly more abstract electronic kind of sound through before he went into his ambient world. All of them great as far as I'm concerned. 47. Okay, so Sailing, One Step Beyond, Wild Horses, and Video Killed the Radio Star. They are all, well, I call them unexpected covers because I am surprised that all of them are covers. Okay, let's take it through. Right, Sailing was by Gavin Sutherland. Who he? The man who wrote Sailing. And then Rod took it to number one, and it was part of the transformation of Rod from Rod into man who thinks he can do Tom Waits covers better than Tom Waits. I think I might have said this one before, but he said after recording Downtown Train, I think it was, that Tom Waits should feel lucky that that someone who could actually perform the song well sang it. I'll stick with Tom's version, Rod. Video Killed the Radio Star was by Bruce Woolley. Again, who? And it was actually a cover. I'm surprised. I thought Trevor Horn wrote it. You may well be aware the One Step Beyond was a Prince Buster song. Madness, certainly at the beginning of their career, were really enthralled to Prince Buster, weren't they? The Prince, their first song, was of course about him as well. So, and Wild Horses, well, this is a little bit of a cheeky one because you might be sitting there thinking, well, hang on, how's it a cover? Because Keith Richards wrote it. Right, Keith Richards wrote it and gave it to the Flying Burrito Brothers. The Flying Burrito Brothers did their version, and then the Rolling Stones did it afterwards. So technically, cover version. If you don't agree, tough. It's my quiz. I suppose it's a little bit like take the Rolling Stones the other way around. When at the beginning of their careers, they asked Lennon McCartney for a song. Lennon McCartney went off into the corner and came back, went to the toilet, I believe, and 5 minutes later had got I Want to Be Your Man, which they released, had a big hit with, and of course the Beatles did their own version of it afterwards with Ringo singing. There you go. 48, the connections here. Right, I told you it was songs between them. Well, let's start on the left-hand side there. Right, the Stranglers recorded a song, Goodbye Toulouse. You may remember it. Modern Lovers recorded Pablo Picasso. David Bowie recorded Andy Warhol. And Don McLean recorded Vincent. Yes, all songs about artists. And of course, for an added little one, David Bowie, of course, later covered Pablo Picasso as well. Songs about artists. Told you Don McLean was the key to that one. I've done this before, this connection, not with these albums, but apologies well, not really apologies. I don't apologise at all for it. I think it's a great connection here. I'm a Hitchcock nut as well, and these 70s albums connect Hitchcock films. The Lodger, Stage Fright, Frenzy, and Sabotage, all Hitchcock films, and all classic Hitchcock films as well. Okay, and finally, what's the connection of these? The connection is Spans with siblings in. Okay, we've got CCR at the left there with John and Tom Fogerty. We've got Sparks, famously Ron and Russell Mael. We have the Undertones down in the left there with John and Vincent O'Neill, and of course the Kinks with Ray and Dave Davis. I hope you've enjoyed our tour through the 70s and through the different genre there, and I hope you did all right out of 50. I hope you didn't mind my waffling on too much there. I had plenty of stories there for you. I hope you managed to get through it and didn't give up halfway through. But we'll be back with another one next Sunday. So, see you then.